In 1864, Chambersburg was a prosperous town of about 5,500 people. Settled by Scots-Irish, German, and English immigrants, it was well located for goods and people, moving east to west and north to south. The town had several inns where travelers could lodge, many stores and shops on the main streets, mills, factories, cabinet makers, hat makers, shoemakers, brick makers, and various other industries. In the latter part of July, the inhabitants were tired of war, of the loss of fathers and sons, of personal property, weary of solemn marches to local cemeteries and of doing without. They had already faced more privation than most people could even imagine having to bear. After all, the Confederates had been here twice before, tearing up railroad tracks, cutting telegraph lines, vandalizing the surrounding countryside in 1862, and then came Lee with his army in June of 1863. In the early morning heat of July 30th, Confederate General John McCausland, on orders from General Jubal Early, attempted to blackmail the town of Chambersburg in revenge for Union General David Hunter's burning areas of the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia. The town was to be burned if either 100,000 in gold or 500,000 in greenbacks was not forthcoming. The demands could not be made, and so the Confederates proceeded to lay the torch to the central area of several blocks. They also burned the Chambersburg Academy, which functioned as a hospital during the war, and burned Norland, the home of Alexander McClure, state representative and confidant of Abraham Lincoln. While Alexander McClure was away on that fateful day, Mrs. McClure was saved through the auspices of Daniel Ridgway Knight, who led several families by walking north about 10 miles to Shippensburg to get away from the destruction. By 11 o'clock, McCausland's duty complete, he moved westward toward McConnellsburg in Fulton County. The damage was done. 278 houses, factories, and businesses were completely destroyed, and 3,000 people were left homeless. As one of Union General William Averill's men proclaimed, reaching Chambersburg around 2 p.m., I'm quoting, "Houses on fire on both sides. It was no time to stop. The atmosphere was stifling, smoke settling over the earth like a pall. The citizens gathered in groups, strong men with bowed heads, women wringing their hands, and the little children clinging to their mothers' dresses." End quote. These were the people who, for the previous 2 years, had raised sums of money for the troops and cooked and sewed for the soldiers, and now they were penniless. Mrs. J.S. Nixon in 1884, recalling the events, wrote, "In the following days, these same loyal, kind, patriotic, hospitable people were homeless and penniless. When blackened walls and hearthstones were all that remained of our homes, when sad memories of the past were of hourly occurrence, when the problem of how to keep the wolf from the door was ever pressing upon us, this large amount of money was sent to the Christian Commission. Part of it after the town was in ashes and the people had not bread to eat. The money had been raised for our suffering soldiers, and we did not feel as if we had any right to it, and yet that which should have gained us favor was only an injury. It was received with the utmost coolness by the treasurer of that commission." End quote. Stories of the survivors were related in a book printed by Jacob Hoke in 1884, as he was present during the fire, and he recounted the experiences of several townfolk, it appears that the Confederates would pile up furniture in each house and just start a fire. Many people, losing everything except the clothing on their backs, fled to friends in other parts of the state, but the ones who decided to stay regained their confidence, as Hoke writes. Thomas Wilson, a Southerner who rejected slavery, recalled in his writings that people went from comparative wealth to absolute poverty. It would take $1 million without help from abroad, or there would be so much suffering, he wrote. An appeal was sent out to newspapers asking the benevolent citizens of the North for aid. A relief committee was formed by citizens of Baltimore, and by August the 11th, more than $1,000 was collected, as well as food, clothing, and other donations. Other cities in Pennsylvania and Maryland joined in the effort. What gave these people the strength and endurance to overcome their losses and begin again? Their ancestors left Europe to avoid religious persecution, and then they were forced to endure the Indian massacres and fight a war for independence, and then fight a civil war. They were of hardy stock and resilience and courage. They accepted help from friends and neighbors in the country and abroad in order to survive. They worked out a plan for the coming winter of 1864, as an article in the Valley Spirit newspaper in October of that year indicate the rebels might return, but they didn't. Even though in the post-war years there was widespread unemployment in the North, in Chambersburg employment could be found everywhere in rebuilding the town. As prices of labor and materials were higher, so the houses became more elaborate as the Victorian era changed the architecture. Instead of two-story houses, the town boasted three-story buildings with ornate embellishments. The local courthouse, the first structure to be burned, was rebuilt in 1865 for $52,000. All the early inns were burned, but by August of 1865, the hostelries or hotels were back in business, featuring dining rooms, bars, and overnight accommodations. Places of business were improvised, and the houses which escaped the fire were turned into shops and stores. The original bank resumed business and opened the way for other banks under a national system. The Chambersburg Academy was rebuilt, as well as a new opera house. Railroad shops were rebuilt, and in addition, mills, factories, stables, and other outbuildings were part of the reconstruction, which resulted in economic expansion. Although the fire had imposed hardships on many people, it had no long-range effect on the economic development of the community. In time, new and better buildings replaced the ones destroyed by fire, which gave the town the advantage of modern construction that would have taken many years if acquiring by normal processes of development. However, Chambersburg lacks the quaint, charming downtown areas of surrounding towns. In 1866, the state of Pennsylvania formed a commission to look into why no remuneration was forthcoming for the townspeople. The appointed members decided that Chambersburgers suffered damages in real estate of $713,294 and in personal property of $915,137 for a total of $1,628,431, which was a little over half the original estimate of $3 million in damages. The state then appropriated $500,000 to be distributed by the amount of loss of the recipient, and some of this was received by the claimant. In 1868, another commission was formed, which estimated losses to the county of $2,417,000, which included the town of Chambersburg. Nothing moved forward from that commission. Then, in 1871, An additional $300,000 was appropriated by the state to be divided by Chambersburgers, which was paid to some people. The state appealed to the federal government then, which the legislature approved, but those remaining funds were never forthcoming. A few examples of Civil War damage claims show that Reverend Dr. Schneck claimed $3,000 for a brick and stone home and $3,728 for personal property, totaling $6,428. He only received $2,066 in 1866. Dr. James Hamilton, who spent over a year in Libby Prison after being captured, came home to find nothing left. He claimed $6,600 in real estate losses and $3,060 in personal property, which totaled $9,660. He only received $2,965 in 1866. Both of these men had claims approved by the 1871 Commission, but they may or may not have received any further remuneration. It appears from this ledger that members of the Franklin County Bar Association received $10,284, but whether it dwindled down to the community is unknown. For instance, attorney I.M. Macaulay received $10 for assessment, $600 for getting powers of attorney, $250 for making calculations, $130 for an expense bill, and $297 in dividends, totaling $1,288, but no proof exists that anyone ever received this money. By 1868, there were 16 mills in operation. In the following decade, industrial expansion brought flouring mills, a planing mill, a door factory, a furniture factory, and a company of power transmission, which is still in existence today. These operated by water power because we were fortunate to have nearby streams. In the years afterward, Chambersburg entered upon an era of progress and growth. The Cumberland Valley Railroad was extended to Maryland. The town embarked on municipal ownership and operation of water and light utilities, and the land area of the town was extended. Part of the rebuilding of the town included the center known as the Diamond, where all four directions met. A flagstaff was raised on the 18th of April, 1861, 5 days after the fall of Fort Sumter. Under it, 60,000 rebel troops passed until it was finally cut down by Imboden's cavalry, which constituted the rear of Lee's army in 1863 on their route to Gettysburg. Another flagpole was erected on the same spot and was still standing on the 30th of July, 1864. That flag was taken by a local citizen and saved and restored today, and it is on display at our Historical Society Museum. It was on Decoration Day, 1868, when a group of Chambersburg women assembled and promoted the idea of a memorial to the Union soldiers. They spent the year fundraising and netted $400. The Ladies and Soldiers Organization was established in 1869 with the thought they could work together. Evidently, not much was done for the next several years until people became aware of the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia in 1876. The men and women appeared to work in separate groups, with the men wanting a proper soldiers' monument and the women wanting a fountain. In June 1876, Borough Council agreed to erect a temporary fountain in the public square for July 4th, but the consensus was that a more permanent structure would be a fitting tribute to the soldiers. Finally, in April 1877, the Monument Association met, which included both men and women, to discuss how they could compromise. They reviewed designs but agreed on nothing. Then later, in 1877, a committee visited Philadelphia and New York City companies to come up with the designs that would fit both a fountain and a monument. These designs proved too expensive, and no action was taken until 1878. Then J.L. Mott of New York made an offer to supply a fountain that he had erected in the main building of the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. At the same time, J.W. Fisk of New York submitted his design. It was the second one the committee accepted because it included a fountain, a soldier, and coping of ground basin for $1,700. The fountain was erected and dedicated in July of 1878 after much ado. As you can see, the soldier is still in place facing south, keeping vigil, watching for any rebels to return. Then, in 1883, the veterans wanted a more military presence, so 4 cannons were installed on each side. They were replaced in 1896 with field guns on wheeled carriages, and then electric lights were added in the early 1900s. Over the years, the memorial fountain has needed repairs, especially when cars or trucks hit it like in the past year. But it remains a historic landmark for the thousands of people who have gone by over the years. In 1978, it was placed on the National Register of Historic Places, 100 years after its dedication. The destruction of that fateful day is forgiven, but never forgotten. By tradition each year, we look back on what has been, what is, and what will be, as the town commemorates the burning, but also the town's determination to recover from the ashes. Today, Chambersburg, the spirit of its people, is alive and well.